How do you get your brand past the $10 million a year revenue threshold? That is the topic for today on the Interfares podcast. And really what I want to think about is the journey from 10 to about 30 million. I usually have called this 10 to 50 million, but from 10 to 30 is probably its own journey. I think somewhere from 30 to 50, it starts to shift, and it might be sooner, it might be later, depending on a few things with your brand. But from 10 to 30, there's a thing that happens. I think most brands can kind of get to $10 million in revenue and sort of have a clear playbook to that. Like it seems to me that you can get to 10 million in revenue by getting a few things dialed in. It's a lot of the stuff I talk about all the time, right? Get your unit economics figured out, make sure you run with a lean OpEx, have some LTV. Ideally, that makes your life a lot easier. Get a meta ad system in place to where you can run ads and you're running with manual bids and scaling and all those kinds of things. And, get your basic creative structure set up. All of those things are in place for a brand. And the more as you sort of layer those on from launch through, I don't know, however long it takes you to do it, you kind of layer those on until you end up at about 10 million in revenue if everything goes well, right? And you can do that at some level, but the game changes once you get to there. What gets you to 10 probably won't get you to the next stage. Now, the thing I'm going to say up front is that I don't believe you necessarily need to add channels, either ad channels or revenue channels, on top of your basic business to go from 10 to 30. That's not what I think it comes down to primarily. And so that's part of what I think the sort of demarcation line is here for a lot of brands, is that once they get from, around 30, again, sometimes 50, sometimes 30, somewhere in that range, and they want to kind of get to the next stage, that's probably where you start having to get really good on additional channels besides meta ads, as a meaningful part of your spend, and so on. But how do you go from 10 to 30, I think you can do that without adding a lot in the way of channels. But I think there's some things you have to do that are still sort of at the core engine of the business that are going to get you to that stage. So let me get into them. I've got 5 of them for you in this episode. Okay. And so I want to go through them in order, and they kind of lead to each other in some ways. Okay. And this is, by the way, where a number of my clients are right now and stuff that we're working on together. So okay, number 1 is profit. And this is going to sound so obvious, but I think it's actually really important because of what I'm going to say afterwards, which is that at 10 million, to go to the next stage, you have to be sort of meaningfully, solidly profitable. It's going to be extremely hard to grow quickly, at least to 30 million, if you aren't running sort of at least a 10% bottom line in your business. It could be a little more, a little less, depending on a few things in your business, and especially how cash intensive it is. But for a number of reasons, I think it's just really, really hard to get to the next stage. And the core reason for that is that the next stage is going to require, very likely for a lot of businesses, some operational investment that are going to make it that you're going to need cash to do. You're going to be able to need to take some risks that are going to get you to that stage. Okay. And that requires some money. And so when you're in an earlier stage business, a lot of times you just have to account for every dollar in a way that makes it extremely challenging to grow too fast. Right. And so every dollar you get in goes right back out into the business in some clear way. And you have to have a return on it pretty quickly. I've had this conversation with agency types a lot of times. You think about like Google ads or something, right? Like sometimes Google ads just takes longer to generate value from than meta ads does. Meta ads, you can sometimes turn it on and kind of get value pretty quickly. And as you launch new creative, as you try new things, like there's just ways to spend very little money on the distribution of your meta ads that isn't immediately profitable, and especially leveraging manual bids, et cetera. But, Google ads, it doesn't really work that way. Now, I'm not talking about a channel diversification strategy primarily, but this is just like one of the examples I think of that works like this, where if you want to open up on, let's say you did want to open up a new channel, right? Let's say it was YouTube or something. It's just really, you can't go do that unless you're ready to lose money. And in fact, I would say this is the reason why channel diversification is not the key at 10 million so much as a little bit later, because opening up new channels sometimes takes a lot of money, right? Whether that's like a really serious Amazon approach with Amazon ads. TikTok Shop now is increasingly a high barrier to entry with a lot of money. I had Jordan West and Paul Howdeggy on recently. Both of them talk about this, that it's just like you got to spend money on TikTok ads on top of the creator fees. Like there's just a lot more to that than there was maybe when it very first started. The sort of initial arbitrage of the new channel is gone when you talk to those guys. You can go check those episodes. Just search those names, Jordan West Paul from BK Beauty. That's probably the easiest way to find that. And go listen to them if you want, if you're interested in TikTok shops, because that's exactly what they say. Jack Rubin talked about YouTube. Just when they opened it up, it took them hundreds of thousands of dollars basically to figure out sort of how to make YouTube work for them. And his advice to everybody was, before you go spend on it, make sure that you are ready to lose some money. Those are like large amounts of money, 6-figure, et cetera, losses. What I'm talking about is smaller things, but that nonetheless make it so that when you make the investment, it doesn't necessarily cost you too much if you lose out. And so actually, I would say to a number of brands, if you get to 10 million and you don't have access to capital in a clear way, and maybe if you're really risky, you could do this with cheap debt, or if you have some equity in the business, something like that you've raised, there's some ways to have cash on hand for this. But it's just, if you have to account for every dollar that you make, it's really tough. And in fact, when I see people do this with debt or equity, a lot of times, because some of these things are not going to work, they take that as an excuse to do them poorly, and they just start throwing money away. And so it's actually, I think, sometimes helpful for brands that have bootstrapped all their way, but who now have extra money because they've already gotten into the habit of accounting for every dollar they spend. And they care about it a lot. They want to make sure that those dollars generate a return. If that's the case for a lot of those brands, then they will be really good at looking at the things you need to do next to get you from 10 to 30 and recognize that you may lose some money, but also not throw money away, because there's a fine line there that makes it challenging. So for me, that's one of the core things I would be thinking about for that stage is, and in fact, what I might even say is, if you're around 10 million and trying to get to the next stage, but that 10 million is fairly lean on profit, I might even worry a little bit more on sort of getting back under the hood and continuing to make sure that the engine works perfectly and everything is great before I push too hard to try to get to 30. It's not like you can't try to keep growing or whatever. But before I took any big swings, I'd really probably try to make sure the engine is in a place where it can really take me far. Because if you don't do that, it's going to make some things really challenging. Okay. So let's talk about what the first of those is that I think is one of these things. And so here's number 2 that gets you from 10 to 30. It's scaled creative output. In the early stages, from 1 to 10 million, so much of the game of meta ads is like finding ads and angles that work and opening up audiences and opening up formats and all those things. That can take 3 months, that can take a year, it can take 2 years, it can take a long time, it can take a short time. There's all kinds of different elements of it, but it can take a lot of work, okay? Once you get to that point where you feel like you have a sense of what to communicate to your audience, it turns out there are like many, many ways to communicate that thing. So the what to communicate becomes a how to communicate and how much to communicate. And volume of creative output, again, where that output is focusing on messages that work and angles and audiences that work for your audience, becomes a lot of the game. Now, the problem is scaling up creative output can be a little bit more expensive on the actual production side, depending on a number of things. Now, this is where, of course, there are tools right now that are making this cheaper, like AI, but I just don't think that's going to solve the whole thing completely. What I'm thinking about more is like, this is where you're bringing in third-party creative agencies who are just scaling up output with very different creative than what you do. I've seen this work really well for at least one client of mine, where they're adding additional creative on top of the creative that, my agency produces for them. It's really different than the kind of creative that I produce. And so that's really good. Okay. Another way you might be thinking about scaling creative would be just with internal hires and with production people and things like that. Now, again, even if you work with like people like my friends at More Staffing or their design and video studio, behind the scenes studio, you are going to have to pay some amount of money to get the volume of ads going that you need to do. You might have to increase media buying fees as part of this, because now you have to build all the ads in meta ads, and it takes time to do that. And there's like all of these layers of doing this, where in some way or another you do this. And what a lot of people find is that as they start doing this, they want to do more and more of it. And it may require some risks. It may require working with, again, third-party teams who cost some money and who cost some money up front, and they are not, and you don't necessarily want to shop that on price. You want to find people who are good. And therefore, having some of that profit on hand is part of what you have to do. Now, as you scale up that output, I think it's going to pay off for you. And this is where you take your meta account sort of to a new layer and to a new level, to where you're outputting a huge amount of creative all the time with good quality stuff against the angles that you think are the most powerful for your audience, and probably exploring new angles still. You probably haven't solved them all at $10 million, right? It's also where working with my friends at FERMAT, who I've talked about, like this is where probably they come in really, really well, really from before 5 million in revenue, they're probably going to be too expensive for most people, and really maybe even closer to 10. But once you get there, now the ability to spend at a level where your landing page and funnel experience is going to matter a lot more. You can test funnel changes a lot more easily if if you're sort of sub 10 million in revenue on Meta. So that means your spend is probably sub 3 million, on Meta, something like that. Maybe sub 4. It's like it's hard until you get to the top end of that to actually drive enough traffic to landing pages to really test them at all. If your business is scaling, your team is scaling, and you are not looking in the Philippines to add talent as you need it, what are you doing? Probably, I'll tell you what you're doing. Probably you're thinking about Filipino talent in your business as like $5 an hour virtual assistant, and that is a mistake. There is way better and way more talent in the Philippines than that. I know that because More Staffing is my partner that I've worked with basically in every part of my business in some way or another, and in a lot of their businesses as well, for over a year. And I've seen them place talent across a whole range of stuff at like manager, director, and executive levels. Like, in fact, More Staffing was founded by people who were working in US-based e-commerce businesses on the supply chain side. And many of the very smartest supply chain people I've ever met in my life are people in the Philippines. Again, we're talking about like executive level talent here that is available to you. And of course, crucially, because it's in the Philippines, that talent is meaningfully less expensive for you than it would be hiring equivalent talent in the US. And at the same time, because it's less expensive, you can actually hire at the top of the market in the Philippines, which attracts better quality people to your team. It's a win-win. It is great for everyone. And these are some of my favorite people to work with across the board. I really love More Staffing. I've seen, like I said, supply chain people who do incredible work. I have worked personally. My team has been staffed up for my agency with design and edit help from the Philippines as well. I have great designers and editors who do really good quality work. There's all kinds of talent available to you across the business, and you should at least be exploring, at least get on a call. Go to morestaffing.co/AF, morestaffing.co/AF to get connected to a Philippines-based staffing agency that is specializing in e-commerce. They understand your business well, help you find the right person, and will do everything that is needed to get access to and then train, onboard, and provide great coaching to great e-commerce talent for your business. Go check it out today. And so you really, it's really about more creative on platform first, but you get a tool like FERMAT, which isn't cheap. And now you can actually do a whole bunch of stuff with that. But that also means you need man hours to put into something like that, to put into FERMAT, even with the help that they give. And so now you've got all these things. And so what I'm saying is there's this piled up approach where you're testing angles and creative and ads. And look, the tools are amazing. There are agency supports who are awesome and all those things. And that is actually how you get to that next stage. So it is an investment well worth making. I'm telling you right now, go do that. That's why I have the sponsors that I have. That's why I believe in them. For this part of the business, why I'm using them myself, right? But my point is that is the thing that gets you to that stage. And the reason number one is so important is that if you have to have some profitability to play with to start to use those things and unlock the tools and unlock the stages that get you there. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So number two, scaling the output. So if stage one of a Meta Ads account is about finding sort of the messaging fit for your audience and finding the ads that are working, stage two is about spending against creative output to sort of push that forward at a lot more scale. Okay, and that can be, again, lander, website, it could be all kinds of things to as part of that full funnel build. Okay. Number three, also an extension of this is where I think influencer and seeding becomes basically a non-negotiable for a lot of brands. Look, the reason they're called influencers is because they influence people. I just think influencers probably are an important part for the vast majority of brands' journeys in some way or another. Now, it's different than it used to be. I think there's still a lot of people who think of influencer as being somehow synonymous with pay for post. And I don't think that's it. I think the influencer game has changed in a lot of ways, which makes it tricky in a lot of ways to understand how influencer works and what's different about it now versus what it used to, and different brands engage with influencers in different ways, and how you get content for paid and do you whitelist and all those things. But like, this is another thing that just like is going to require some testing for your brand to figure out what is the actual best approach for you. And because it's going to require some testing, it's going to require some money. You need to find who the influencers are that work well. You're going to need to seed and send product to a lot of different people. And it's as you do that you're going to be able to engage with influencers who power your brand to go to the next level, because now you're getting to a larger brand that's reaching more people. And look, as much as I would love it if rational argumentation about why your product is better than others was the main driver of driving sales because, whatever, maybe I would like the way the world worked better if everybody was behaving more rationally. I'm not sure. But the truth is influence and story is better. Like almost any supplement works this way. Like, yeah, sure. You can go research the medical journals of why a given ingredient might be good for your gut health or something, or you can listen to somebody you trust who has done that research for you as best as you can tell you to take it. Okay. Which means if you're the supplement brand, you need to get the person who people already trust on your team. And that means sending out product and that means creating relationships, and that means paying sometimes for posts or for usage rights. It might mean doing collabs and partnerships and all those kinds of things, but it's a larger program. And I think for most brands to get from 10 to 30, they're going to need to do that. Now, you don't need to go full macro. You don't need to go try to hire Justin Bieber for your brand at $10 million. Like, I'm not talking about going and finding extremely expensive people. Okay. But there is a stage there. Now, I do think the other value of this is that to go from 30 to 50 and beyond that to 100, et cetera, like you're going to start thinking about larger partnerships and larger influencer relationships and larger collaborations and all the things that kind of fit in this category. And so developing some skills on smaller and mid-sized partnerships can be really valuable as well. You'll begin to build the muscles that you need to go do this at the next stage. But I think you should be exploring that to get to that stage. And certainly that also helps in your ad account as well. Again, with content that you get from influencers that you can run as an ad, with whitelisting, all those things. Okay. Number four, product development. This is another aspect that I think is easy to miss. And again, different brands will have different ones of these be primarily important relative to the others. But a lot of times there's a product that a brand makes that can get them to 10 million. And part of the way they're really going to get to the next level, and it really depends a little bit on your category here, is by releasing new products or upgraded versions of your products or limited edition versions of your products or whatever. It's going to take the audience you've already acquired, the customers you've already acquired, get more value out of them by providing value with new products, and also open up new audiences with the new products that you have. And again, this may or may not be the case for your particular brand, but I think product development is an easy thing to overlook. Again, especially if you're in the fog of war of trying to get your brand to $10 million in revenue, right? That's hard work to do that. And a lot of times what brands are doing to get there is they're building product, or they've got a couple of hero products that they're using all the time. And they may be doing some additional, flavors or colors or whatever changes they can to do this, some line extensions in some way or another. But they're not really thinking hard about like, what is really going to open up a whole new range of audience? What's going to really provide a bunch more value? Now that I've got $10 million worth of customers behind me, right? What would make them just delighted in my brand, or more people like them just delighted by my brand? And so to get to that next stage, a lot of times what brands are going to need to do is invest in product development. Now, once again, this requires money. This is, again, why I think it's probably important to be solidly profitable at this stage, or to have some access to capital, ideally profit. These things can be risky. I remember doing this at an earlier stage for a business at one point where we released a product we were really excited about and just like totally fell flat. But if you could do this well, it can be like a whole bunch of bolted on revenue, and it's really high margin revenue in the process. And then, of course, also, like I said, especially if paired with scaled creative output, now you can take this new product, give it to the creative teams that you want, and you can rinse and repeat the process that got you to 10 million, except on new products. So there's ways that this goes wrong. Brands release products because they're supposed to, not because they're actually really adding any really value. They actually become time sucks against core products. In fact, sometimes maybe you don't need to do product development until 30 or 50 or whatever, because your core product is so good and there's so much TAM for it. But product development is something you should be thinking about to create more moments and open up new audiences. Okay. Number 5, brands need to get from 10 to 30. You've got to be able to master moments. Okay. And this is partly product releases, like I'm talking about. It's also sales. But now I'm thinking less about the product itself and more about dialing in things that are repeatable at scale. And this is fresh on my mind from Black Friday this year, where I'm seeing brands, like some brands really get to a point where even if they had a solid Black Friday, they really don't have a sale that they love yet. Like their offer hasn't been spectacular, and they're kind of turning around and going like, maybe we should change that offer. And they just don't know what it is for their customer in their category that really moves the needle yet. Or they just don't have the sort of like creative and landing page approach. And maybe it's like, maybe for a brand, it's like, we wanted them to go choose and gave them a stack discount on the site where it's like 40% off if you buy $400 or 30% off if you buy $300, that kind of thing. Maybe it's a BOGO, maybe it's a flat 20% off, or maybe we pre-build some bundles on a landing page where we tell people, go get this particular bundle. And we don't want them to go shop around the site. We want to tell them what to buy. Like, there's a lot of different ways to run these sales, and how you handle the email portion of this, and how you list build on it, and how you think about ad spend going into those moments. There's real skill to all these things. There's similarities, and there's things to learn from other brands who have done these things plenty of times before you. There's also differences and distinctions for how they're going to be met with your particular customer. And again, there's also just skill, like I said, where there's a muscle to build here. And so if you can get really good at that, you can push moments further. There's occasionally brands in categories where this is less important. I'm thinking of supplements, or really anything where subscription is a main part of the business, because subscription, if you can really crack a subscription funnel, then the main way you keep growing is by getting better and better and better and better at sending more traffic through that funnel, because typically subscribers are so valuable that the way you actually grow is by generating a ton of returning customer revenue off the back of the new customers that you're acquiring. And you just try to do that at scale, and open up more products and keep going and keep going and keep going. It's more evergreen, it's more iterative, that kind of thing. But for almost everybody else, I mean, let's say your LTV in a year is less than 100%. Okay. Pretty much for everybody else, creating moments is the way you do it. And in fact, a lot of times the way you generate LTV is with moments. This is really underrated. The obvious example of this is apparel. Okay. The way you generate LTV in apparel is by releasing new products and by having sales. And because I came, let's say I bought, for BFCM this year, I bought your brand. Now I'm paying attention to it. And it's the first time I ever bought from you during your sale. Let's say I get a sweatshirt from you and I think it's awesome and I love it and I wear it. Well, what happens in 3 months when you release something else new that I like? Well, I'm probably going to think about coming back, or if there's another sale or whatever it is. And so the moment actually generates the LTV. There is no better landing page and funnel building software than FERMAT. As I said on a recent episode of mine, FERMAT is like the Ferrari of landing page software. It's really crazy. It's why I was just talking about it on this episode. It just can do so much more than almost anything else. I mean, definitely not almost, than anything else I've ever seen in the space like it. It has the table stakes elements of really great, smooth, easy landing page building. That is awesome. It's also the fastest loading landing pages I've ever seen. Like, so the lag time from ad click to landing page is virtually nothing. It's crazy. But at the same time, it can go way beyond just that. There's the ability to build full custom funnels, including custom enhanced PDPs with customized bundles. You can literally change the product name really easily. You can change all of the different elements of the product, build separate custom bundles without having to go do all this weird back-end work in Shopify and create duplicated products and all that stuff. It just allows you to make it so that your messaging is super smooth and super easy for very different kinds of customers, even if it's the same product that you are attempting to sell them. Okay. And so it allows you to build really, really tight funnels as you reach different audiences in really good ways. And I've personally seen that with clients that I work on, where using all of these different features of the software has allowed me to reach new customers. And again, I've said this before, but when we first launched it with a client of mine, we saw basically a 50% increase in spend almost immediately by using tighter messaging all the way through my funnels than anything I'd had before. So I'm a huge fan of FERMAT. If you're building up your ad approach more seriously than you have before, if you're at the stage of business I'm talking about in this very video, you should consider using FERMAT. Go to fermatcommerce.com/AF, fermatcommerce.com/AF to get a look at it and see if it is right for you at the stage of business you're in. It is really awesome. Go check it out. And getting really good at doing those, and even maybe doing more of them. This is where, maybe you release 3 products a year. What happens if you can go to 8 product releases and 4 sales? So you get one good moment every month. What happens if you can get to releases every 2 weeks? I remember talking to a brand at one point that had gotten so dialed in. They were an apparel brand. They'd gotten so dialed in on their process. And this is exactly what happened. It took them from about 10 to scaling up this process, took them from 10 to 30-ish, and then from 30 to 60, right? By just doing this more and more. Here's the process. They released more. They had more product drops more often, until eventually, when they were getting to that, mid 8-figure stage, really from 30 to 50 or 30 to 60, when they were getting there, they were releasing products every 2 weeks, on payday, and they had figured out how to do that. That meant they dialed in the process of photo shoots for all those products, of email releases, of product development itself, of approval processes, of figuring out pricing, of inventory buying, of inventory forecasting. There's all these little details of doing that really well, right? Sales are similar, actually. Like if you're gonna do that, you have to get good at understanding how the inventory is going to work and preparing your 3PL and forecasting those moments. And the more of them you do, the better of them you'll get at it. You'll bank learnings along the way, and as you bank those learnings, you turn those into better versions of it next time. And the more you can rinse and repeat and dial in things that you know move the needle for your customers, the easier it is to make each moment bigger than the last one, and to use each moment to acquire more customers than the last time, and to use each moment to drive more returning customers than the last time. And so that's the way you do it. I think if you do those 5 things really, really well, you can get from 10 to 30. I won't say easily. I almost said easily, but it's not easy. It's hard. It requires building more organization, requires more touch points. It's challenging. I probably should have put in here somewhere like something like, add EOS or something into your business. If you want to hear, again, I did an episode recently with Maytab Bogle, who talked through like management strategy and some of those things. Cause this is a stage where you really have to be thinking about a lot more of that kind of stuff usually. Okay. But if you can do them, it's maybe not easy, but it is doable, and there is a clear roadmap to doing it. It's not rocket science either, right? You just get better at those skills over time and rinse and repeat as much as possible. Okay, so I'll go back through them one more time just for simplicity. Number 1, you need to be solidly profitable at 10 million before you can probably go do this really easily, or else the capital required is going to be tough. Number 2, you need to scale up your creative output, particularly on Meta, but this would probably be true on almost any channel that is your primary channel. And for most people, that's Meta. Number 3, influencer and seeding. This fits with number 2 as well, but beginning to use influencers costs more money up front, requires bigger risks, but can really, really pay off and can be something that is an important muscle to build in your business. Number 4, product development. Reactivating past customers, opening up new audiences, and feeding that meta machine that you're building, like I said, in number 2. And then number 5, mastering moments, getting really good at coming up with the product drop and sales strategy and all of the operational elements of doing those things well that are required. If you could do those things really well, you can get from 10 to 30, and that's what it looks like. That's what the playbook is to make it happen. Thanks so much for watching or for listening from a different location than usual. My wife told my boys that we're on a termite adventure. Our house is being fumigated, so we're in an Airbnb. Brought my microphone with me. Thanks for bearing with me. Podcast at ajfgrowth.com is where you can email me if you have any thoughts on this episode. I would love to hear them, or you can tag me publicly at Andrew J. Ferris on X. That would be a fantastic way to have the conversation in public, get other people involved. I would love that. And of course, ajfgrowth.com is where you can go for absolutely everything that I'm doing. Don't forget to follow up with my sponsors, More Staffing and FERMAT. They're both great. Worked with them for a while because I really believe in them, really use their stuff, really like them. And I don't shill. I only take sponsors whose products I really use. And so I'm really happy to recommend both of them to you. Don't forget to subscribe. Did I already say that? I think so. Anyway, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. You know to do that. I've got all kinds of great content coming soon. And if you like this content, you'll like more of the stuff that's coming down the pipe. So thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon.